Wake of the Bellerophon by T.B. Dahl. Chapter 12. Homecoming. Thomas Oxenham woke to hammering. For one foolish moment he thought he was back beside the pond, and William was shaping some improvement to victory with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Then HMS Bellerophon groaned around him. The hammock shifted beneath his weight, and pain arrived with naval punctuality. It came first through his skull, hard and white, like a wave breaking directly behind his eyes. Then his ribs reported, then his shoulder, then both arms. Then a collection of bruises he had not personally authorized declared themselves from hip, thigh, chest, elbow, and back. Thomas lay still and took inventory. Nothing seemed missing. This was a favorable beginning. He lifted one hand to the bandage around his head. The cloth was rough beneath his fingers. The wound beneath it throbbed as if a small drummer had taken station there and refused relief. "Bloody hell," Thomas muttered. "Look who has risen from the dead." Farley sat on his sea chest, polishing brass buttons, his coat folded across his knees. One cheek was bruised purple. A strip of linen crossed his left hand. His usual easy expression had been reduced by fatigue, but not defeated. Thomas tried to swing his legs from the hammock. His body objected in several languages. "You look," Farley said, "as though someone keel-hauled you, regretted it, and then dropped you down a hatch for variety." "I feel worse." "That is because you are alive. The dead are spared comparisons." Thomas eased himself to the deck. The berth was dim, cramped, and changed. Not much had moved, yet everything had altered. A chest stood unopened where Walton's had been. Grant's hammock was gone. A dark stain near the table had been scrubbed and not erased. The air smelled of damp wool, powder smoke carried below in clothing, stale rum, blood somewhere in the seams of memory, and the old bilge beneath it all. Thomas pulled on his shirt. Each button became a negotiation. "What is happening above?" "Repairs," Farley said. The ship took a beating. Thomas reached for his waistcoat. Farley's voice sobered. "You heard about Walton and Grant?" Thomas stopped. His fingers remained on the cloth. "No." Farley looked down at the button in his hand. "Both gone. Boarding action. French grape shot caught Grant before he crossed. Walton bled out on the enemy deck." The berth seemed to draw closer. Walton, tall, brown-haired, scar through one eyebrow, practical advice about hiding Latin until needed. Grant, hard-faced, yes, often unkind, one of Milford's followers, but with a gift for imitating officers so accurately that even men he mocked had once laughed before realizing. Gone, not absent, not on watch, not transferred, not sleeping late, gone into canvas and sea while Thomas lay senseless in the orlop. Farley continued because news, once begun, rarely has the mercy to stop. Mr. Flint lost a hand. Thomas looked up sharply. Flint? A shot took it near the wrist. Surgeon did the rest. He was swearing instruction at the carpenter 10 minutes later so the ship may survive. Thomas shut his eyes. The boatswain's broad hands had seemed part of Bellerophon herself. And Kempe. Sick bay, ball in the shoulder. Doctor says he will live, though he will not be dancing up the ratlines soon. Thomas finished dressing in silence. Death had become named. Before battle it had lived in warning, story, and imagination. Now it had stolen seats at table. It had taken voices from the berth. It had removed a hand from Mr. Flint and left his authority somehow still standing. On the quarterdeck, Lieutenant Ballard directed repairs to the shattered rail. His right arm was in a sling. A long cut marked his cheek from ear toward jaw. His coat had been repaired in haste. He looked tired enough to be several men. None of them rested. "Mr. Oxenham," Ballard said as Thomas approached. "Back among the living." "Yes, sir." Thomas touched his bandaged head. "Reporting for duty." Ballard studied him. "You are white as a topsail." I can manage, sir. That was not the question. Thomas remained standing. Ballard looked him over another moment, then nodded toward the waist. We are short-handed. The French were generous with damage. Report to the carpenter's mate. Make yourself useful, and do not bleed on anything important. Yes, sir. The next hours became labor. Labor was simpler than thought. Thomas hauled line, sorted broken spars, carried wedges, held planking while a carpenter drove nails, fetched tarred canvas, passed tools, and helped splice severed running rigging under the impatient eye of men who had no time to admire injury. The mizzen topsail yard had been shot through and required jury rigging before the ship could be handled properly. Every movement sent pain through his ribs. Every bend made his head pulse. Every shouted order reminded him he was not dead, which was both comfort and obligation. Above, men worked aloft among damaged lines. Below, the wounded remained in the cockpit. Between those worlds, Bellerophon repaired herself by using every hand still attached to a man. By afternoon, Thomas leaned against a gun carriage and discovered that standing still could be more difficult than working. A marine approached. Mr. Oxenham, captain's compliments. He requests your presence in his cabin. Thomas straightened too quickly. The deck tilted. The marine pretended not to notice. Captain Hope's cabin bore its own scars. One stern window was boarded where shot had smashed through. A beam had been splintered and braced. Charts lay weighted on the table, though one corner was stained with something dark that had not been there before the battle. The cabin was still larger, cleaner, and more orderly than any space Thomas occupied, but war had entered even here and left boot marks. Hope sat at his desk with dividers in one hand. He looked up. Mr. Oxenham. Sir, how is the head? Improving, sir. Liar, Hope said mildly. Sit before you fall and oblige me to call the surgeon. Thomas sat. The chair was indecently comfortable. Hope set down the dividers. I have received Lieutenant Ballard's report on your conduct. Thomas's stomach tightened. Hope folded his hands. He speaks highly of your composure under fire and your initiative during the boarding of Vengeurs du Peuple. Thomas looked down. I did what seemed necessary, sir. Many men fail even that modest test. Hope leaned back. Your leaving assigned station is noted. Yes, sir. So is the fact that 2 British officers are alive who might not be otherwise. Thomas did not answer. His mouth had gone dry. Hope studied him, then said, I served with your father on Juno. Thomas looked up. You did, sir. He was second lieutenant before my promotion. James Oxenham was not a man given to noise, but in difficulty he became very quiet indeed. That is useful in an officer. Hope's gaze moved briefly to the boarded stern window. He saved us once in a squall off Ushant, when the captain was laid low with fever, cool-headed, decisive, no drama. The ship could have been lost, and afterward he spoke of the matter as if he had corrected a misplaced chair. Thomas almost smiled. That sounded like James. Hope picked up a folded letter from the desk. You are living up to a formidable example, Mr. Oxenham. Do not let that flatter you. Examples are useful only if they drive rather than decorate. No, sir. We are putting into Portsmouth for repairs. Admiral Howe has ordered the fleet in. Bellerophon requires dockyard attention before she is fit for further service. Hope held out the letter. You will deliver this to your father. It details your conduct in action. I am granting you a fortnight's leave to recover from your injuries. Thomas stared at the letter. Leave, sir? Do not look alarmed. You are not being dismissed. You are being repaired like the ship, though I expect the dockyard would make poorer work of your head than the surgeon. Thomas took the letter carefully. Thank you, sir. You have earned it. Hope picked up the dividers again, then added without looking up, Rest while you can, Mr. Oxenham. War seldom offers recovery twice from the same angle. Portsmouth received the fleet like a city that had decided glory was best enjoyed loudly. By the time Bellerophon limped in 2 days later, news of Howe's victory had already run ahead of the ships, exaggerated, corrected, embellished, printed, sung, shouted, and sold in broadsheets by boys who knew neither longitude nor restraint. Crowds lined the docks, flags flew from buildings, bands played rule, Britannia with vigor if not universal tuning. Women waved handkerchiefs, men cheered themselves hoarse. Children pointed at shattered rails and patched masts, as if battle damage were a fairground display. The 6 captured French ships caused the greatest sensation, towed or escorted in with British colours over French tricolours. Prize crews stood aboard them with the alert satisfaction of men guarding profit and history at once. Thomas stood near the quarter-deck rail, still pale, but steadier. Farley joined him. "Heroes welcome?" "For admirals and captains," Thomas said. Farley grinned. "You are too modest. I intend to claim that any cheering from that section of dock is aimed at me." Thomas followed his gesture. "That is a fish cart. Patriotism wears many smells." Farley looked at him more closely. "You are for home?" "A fortnight." "Good." "You?" "Staying aboard, no home to visit." Thomas said nothing. Farley shrugged. "Portsmouth offers consolation, some of it affordable, much of it regrettable." After Bellerophon was secured, Thomas gathered his belongings, Captain Hope's letter, and the small portion of himself that had not been left somewhere between the gun deck and Vengeur du Peuple. His uniform coat was too damaged to wear respectably. Powder stains and torn cloth told too much and not enough. He changed into civilian clothes and felt oddly less real. Ballard met him at the gangway. "Mind you return in one piece, Mr. Oxenham." "I shall try, sir. I have invested considerable time in your education." "Do not squander it by being run over by a farm cart." "No, sir." Ballard held out his left hand, the right being slung. Thomas shook it. "Give my respects to your father." "I will." "And Mr. Oxenham?" "Yes, sir." Ballard's face was stern, but the eyes were kind by naval standards. "Do not let civilians make you say more than you wish. They prefer glory clean. You are not obliged to wash it for them." Thomas nodded. "Thank you, sir." The dockyard was worse than battle in one respect. No one knew where to stand. Sailors, marines, dock workers, merchants, wives, sweethearts, porters, officers, clerks, boys selling newspapers, men selling pies, women selling things not advertised by daylight, all pressed through noise, carts, ropes, barrels, and celebration. Thomas's head throbbed under the assault. He had grown accustomed to the order of a ship where chaos had stations. Portsmouth's chaos wandered freely. He found a mail coach for Exeter, the name Oxenham, a naval coat, folded across his lap, and remaining coins secured a place beside a wool merchant and an elderly lady travelling to see a son she described as delicate, which later proved to mean 22 and lazy. Once his fellow passengers learned he had been at the battle, questions began. Had he seen Lord Howe? How many Frenchmen had he killed? Was the enemy cowardly? Were ships really blown to pieces? Was the sea red? Did boys faint? Was it true French sailors carried knives in their boots? Thomas answered politely, sparingly. He learned that civilians enjoyed battle most, when arranged as an anecdote. They liked smoke, courage, flags, and villains. They did not ask about the sound a man made when the surgeon took his arm, or the way Walton's empty chest stood in the berth, or how a French officer lowered his sword with relief because surrender had arrived 3 breaths before death. The journey took 2 days. Coach to Exeter, a change of horses, bad inn food, a night of broken sleep in a room above a stable, then the final stretch by farm cart from Yelmpton, the driver more interested in Bellerophon's prize money than British strategy, and therefore easier company. Late afternoon lay over the lane to Greystone House when Thomas was set down. He paid the farmer, thanked him, and stood alone with his small bundle. The path rose ahead. He knew every bend, every hedge, every stone in the wall where lichen grew pale. Yet his stomach tightened. Battle had not made him afraid of home, but it had made home difficult. He did not know what version of him would arrive at the door. He did not know whether they would see the wound, the uniform, the boy, the officer, or something in between and less easily named. He rounded the final bend. Greystone House stood where it had always stood. Grey stone, slate roof, smoke lifting from the chimney, apple trees beyond, early fruit beginning under leaves. The door opened before he reached it. Anne stood there. One hand rose to her mouth. For an instant she did not move. Then she came down the path. "Thomas!" The word broke. She reached him and held him fiercely enough to remind his ribs of the French broadside. He did not complain. Anne drew back and held him at arm's length, her eyes moving over his face. Bandage, bruises, thinner cheeks, the civilian coat that could not hide naval bearing or exhaustion. "We heard of the battle," she said. "Reports came confused. Your father wrote. No one knew the wounded list properly. They said Bellerophon was engaged heavily. I am here. You are hurt." A bump. Anne's expression made clear that mothers did not raise sons to be insulted by naval understatement. "A rather large bump," Thomas amended. James appeared in the doorway. He wore his post-captain's uniform, newly made, dark blue and white, gold bright at the cuffs. He looked older than Thomas remembered and exactly the same. "Thomas?" "Father?" James came to him. They embraced, not long, not theatrically, but James's hand closed at the back of Thomas's neck for one hard moment, and Thomas felt all the words a naval officer could not say in a lane while his wife watched and his son tried to stand straight. "Welcome home," James said. Inside, Greystone House received him with warmth. Bread, smoke, beeswax, lavender, old stone, and a stillness so complete it seemed indecent after Bellerophon. The rooms were smaller than Thomas remembered, the ceilings lower, the chairs nearer together, the passage narrower. Or perhaps the ship had stretched his sense of space, filling him with decks, masts, guns, and hundreds of men. Anne pressed food upon him at once. Bread just out of the oven, cheese, cold ham. Small beer, more bread. Thomas ate because refusing would have required strength he did not possess. Eliza appeared from the dairy, wiping her hands on her apron. She stopped dead, then she ran. "Tom!" He caught her and winced. She jumped back at once, eyes wide. "You are wounded, only battered. Were you shot?" "No." "Did you see Frenchmen?" "Yes." "Did they have guillotines?" "No." "Did you kill anyone?" "Eliza," Anne said sharply. The question remained in the room. Thomas looked at his sister. She was 9 now. Old enough to ask, too young for the answer, and clever enough to know when adults lied for mercy. He said, "There was fighting." Eliza studied him, then nodded slowly. Anne seized the moment and turned it into instruction. "Your brother will eat before he is interrogated by the Admiralty." Thomas reached inside his coat. "I have a letter, Father, from Captain Hope." James took it. "William Hope," he said. "Good officer. We served together on Juno." "He said so." James broke the seal and read. Thomas watched his father's face. James Oxenham did not perform pride. It arrived quietly, a stillness at the eyes, a tightening at the mouth, a breath drawn through the nose and held a moment too long. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully. "Well," James said, "it seems you distinguished yourself." Anne looked between them. "What does it say?" Thomas saw the choice pass across his father's face. The letter contained Vengeur du Peuple, Milford, the boarding, the breach of station, the Dirk, Ballard's report, Captain Hope's commendation. It contained blood in a language polite enough to pass through a captain's hand. James said, Captain Hope reports that Thomas conducted himself well under fire. He is pleased with his progress. Anne knew she had not been told everything. She also knew in that moment that everything would not help her. "Sit," she said. "Both of you. Thomas needs food and then sleep." That night, Thomas slept in his childhood bed. The stillness woke him. No creak of timbers, no slap of water on hull. No watch called above. No rats behind the bulkhead. No hammock shifting. No distant pump. No one coughing within arm's reach. Only Greystone House settling around him, the orchard beyond the window, a night bird somewhere outside, and his own heartbeat too loud in the quiet. He lay awake a long time before sleep returned. Morning brought pale light and tea. Thomas came downstairs to find James alone at the table with a newspaper. "There you are," James said. "Better?" "Much." This was almost true. Thomas poured tea. "Mother?" "Yelmpton. Supplies." "Eliza with her?" James set down the newspaper. "Now tell me properly." Thomas looked at him. "The newspapers are full of glory and nonsense," James said. "Captain Hope's letter was concise, which is proper but incomplete, which is inconvenient. I want the battle as you saw it." Thomas sat. At first he spoke like a logbook, dates, positions, signals, the chase, skirmishing on May 29th, fog and rain, weather gauge, June 1st, Howe signal, breaking the French line, Bellerophon's place, Éole, then Vengeur du Peuple. James listened without interruption, except to ask about wind, relative position, sail, enemy bearing, Howe's line, and whether the French held formation too long. When Thomas came to the boarding, his voice slowed. James waited. Thomas looked into the tea, now cooling untouched in his cup. "I left my post." "So Hope wrote." "I was ordered to remain with the gun." "Yes." "I had been struck. I think I was not thinking clearly." "That may be true." "Do not hide behind it too quickly." Thomas nodded once. "I saw Milford. A French sailor was about to cut him down." "And?" "I crossed. I used a duck." James's face did not change. "Where?" "Neck." James closed his eyes briefly, not in disapproval, in recognition. "And Ballard?" "He was pressed by two men. I took one from behind." "With the duck?" "Yes." James's hand rested on the table. He did not speak at once. Thomas forced the question out. "Does it get easier?" James looked at him then. "No." Thomas breathed. Some part of him had wanted the opposite answer. Some better part had feared it. James reached across the table and gripped his hand. "The first killing is not made easier by necessity. It is only made survivable by it. You saved lives. You did your duty, even while disobeying an order. That contradiction will trouble you because you are not a fool." Thomas looked down at their hands. "The day killing becomes easy," James said, "is the day you have mislaid something you must not lose. Remember that." A knock came at the door. James rose. When he returned, William Rowe stood behind him, hat in hand. "Look who is here," James said. "He claims a rumour has reached the forge that the hero of Bellerophon has returned." William had grown again, not taller than Thomas, but broader. Forge work had thickened his shoulders and made his hands look older. His hair was wine-tossed. His clean shirt sat awkwardly on him, as if he had put it on for a visit requiring more care than he wished to admit. "Tom," William said. "Will." For a moment they stood like strangers who knew too much about one another. Then William grinned. "Heard you were in quite a scrap." "You could say so." Thomas looked at James. "May we walk?" "Go," James said. "Fresh air will do you good. Do not overtax yourself." The pond waited in the hollow below the orchard. It had not changed. This was almost offensive. The willow still leaned over the water. Reeds crowded the far edge. Sticklebacks flickered in the shallows. The alder root still hid the place where victory had once been kept. Dragonflies stitched the air with bright thread. It seemed impossibly small, not because the pond had shrunk, because the sea had entered Thomas and taken up room. They sat on the bank. William threw a stone. It skipped twice and sank. "So?" William said. "Tell me everything." Thomas began with the fleet. William wanted ships, guns, tactics, signals, names. Thomas gave him those. How? Queen Charlotte. Éole. Vengeur du peuple. Breaking the line. The French formation. The fallen mast. William leaned forward, eyes bright, asking about the guns, the range, the recoil, the damage, whether a 74 truly shook when firing a full broadside. Thomas answered. Then the questions narrowed. What was it like when they fired back? Thomas looked at the pond. Loud. William waited. Not just sound, Thomas said. It strikes through you. The air changes, and before the sound sometimes you see the flash. Then you wait for the ball. That is worse. William swallowed. Were you afraid? Yes. The answer came more easily to William than it had to anyone aboard ship. William nodded as if this made sense, which it did. What happened on the French ship? Thomas picked up a twig and broke it slowly. He told William things he had not told Anne and had only partly told James. The blood on his face, the first dead man by the gun, the way the French sailor's body felt when the dirk entered, the young lieutenant lowering his sword, the smell of the cockpit, the nickname. William listened without interruption. His face changed by degrees. Wonder faded first, then envy, then the boy who had played boarding actions among willows gave way to the apprentice who understood tools entering flesh, because the forge had already taught him what sharp metal could do to meat, hide, and bone. Bloody hell, William said at last. Thomas almost laughed. The phrase had never sounded more useful. William looked at him. You are a proper hero. Thomas shook his head. No. You fought. I was trying not to get killed, and trying to stop others being killed. That is what heroes do. That is what terrified people do when there is no time to think. William turned another stone in his fingers. For a while neither spoke. A duck crossed the pond with foolish dignity. Thomas said, Do not wish for war, Will. William looked at him. It is not like our games. I know that. No, Thomas said, then regretted the sharpness. No, you don't? I didn't. William's jaw tightened. The hurt came quick before he could hide it. Thomas looked down. I did not mean the pond was foolish. Wasn't it? No. William threw the stone hard. It struck the water and vanished without skipping. Thomas searched for words. The right ones had not been issued with his uniform. The pond was where we learned, Thomas said. William said nothing. The games were not war, but they were not nothing. William's shoulders eased by a fraction. Thomas continued slower. When I was at the gun, I knew to trust Jenkins because of you and the punt. Because a man may understand the working of a thing better than the one giving orders. When Howe broke the line, I understood it because of all the times we argued wind and position here. When the Frenchman's mast came down, I thought of you saying a boat without grip only slides. William looked at him then. Thomas met his eyes. The pond was small, but it was big enough to start. William's mouth moved. The old phrase returned between them, changed but not broken. Aye, William said quietly. They sat until the light shifted. Not all distance closed. Some remained, but the bridge held. The fortnight passed quickly, as all leave does when counted by people who wish it longer. Anne fed Thomas as if the Navy had been personally starving him. She mended, measured, packed, repacked, asked about stockings, and never again asked directly whether he had killed anyone. Her eyes sometimes went to the bandage, then to his hands, then away. Eliza demanded ship stories and sorted them into categories. Acceptable. Sails, storms, monkeys, if any, should appear later. Strange coins, jokes involving officers, the idea of Billy Ruffian, the number of guns, and whether rats were truly as bold as claimed. Not acceptable, no parrots yet. Disputed Frenchman. Thomas gave her what he could. At night the family gathered in the parlour. Anne knitted stockings for his return to sea. James carved chessmen from applewood. Eliza practised on the spinet, stopping whenever she made a mistake, and beginning again with violent dignity. Thomas sat by the hearth and listened. He stored these evenings carefully, not as stories, as provisions. William came several times. At first they spoke around things, forge work, Jenkins's merchantman, village news. Craddock, now insufferable in a larger coat, Ridge Farm. Weather. Then slowly talk found its old channels again. Not all of them. Some had silted. Others ran deeper. On the last evening Thomas sat with James in the orchard. The sun went down over the estuary, turning the water copper and the fields dark at their edges. The apple leaves moved softly overhead. Greystone House stood behind them, windows warm. "You return soon," James said. "Yes." "How do you feel?" Thomas watched the light fade. "Ready?" James did not answer at once. Thomas added, not eager, "Not as I was before." "That is no bad thing." "I know more now." "You know a little." Thomas looked at him. James smiled faintly. "And that is much better than knowing nothing while believing it everything." Thomas accepted this. They sat in silence. Then James said, "You did well." Thomas's throat tightened. "I disobeyed an order, yes." "I killed men, yes." "I was frightened, yes." James looked at him. "And you returned to duty." "You asked after the ship's situation." "You did not boast to your mother. You spoke honestly just now." "Courage is not one act, Thomas. It is a pattern under strain." Thomas stared towards the estuary. "I do not feel like a man." "Good." Thomas turned. James's face was steady. Men who are too certain they are men cause trouble for everyone. Become an officer first. The rest may follow in time. The next morning came too soon. It always did. Anne held him at the door longer than before. She pressed a wrapped parcel of food into his hands. Bread, cheese, ham, apples, small cakes tucked where no quartermaster had jurisdiction. "Change your stockings." "Yes, mother." "Do not ignore headaches." "No, mother." "Write." "I will." Eliza gave him a folded drawing. Greystone House in charcoal and ink, the chimney smoking, the orchard behind it, the pond too large in the distance, and a parrot perched inexplicably on the roof. "There," she said. "So you remember where home is?" Thomas examined the parrot. "Has it manners?" "Better than yours." He folded it carefully and placed it inside his coat. James walked him to the lane where the farm cart waited for Yelpton. For a moment father and son stood apart from the house, out of Anne's hearing. "Remember what I taught you," James said. "Keep a cool head, do my duty, look after my men." And, Thomas thought, do not let pride make me stupid. That was your mother, and it is excellent advice. James gripped his shoulder. "I am proud of you, not merely for the battle, for how you have borne the afterpart. That is often where men reveal themselves." Thomas could not answer at once. James embraced him. Then Thomas climbed onto the cart. The driver clicked his tongue to the horse. The wheels turned. Anne and Eliza stood at the door, James in the lane. William had come too, standing by the lower wall with arms folded, the sailor's knife at his belt. He lifted one hand. Thomas lifted his in return. The cart rolled down the lane. Greystone House receded. The orchard closed around it. The pond vanished behind the hedge. At the bend Thomas turned for the last look. Home stood solid and grey, chimney smoke, rising into the morning. When it disappeared, he faced forward. Portsmouth waited, Bellerophon waited, war waited. He had left home once as a boy reaching for the sea. He returned now to the sea, carrying home inside him like ballast. What kind of officer he would become remained undecided. The question was no longer distant. It had put on boots and begun walking beside him.
The story continues in the next chapter, so make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with fellow book lovers.